Welcome to On My Couch. So my co-host Sue and I, our plan is to really, have good conversations with interesting and smart people about particular topics that we're curious about, that we want to learn more about and potentially bring to life in our work. So welcome to this edition of On My Couch. So my name's Damien. I'm the owner of OMC Group, and what OMC Group does is really fundamentally help people work better together. So we specialize in leadership and strategy and team effectiveness, and but fundamentally the why for us is around helping people work better together. My co-host Sue. So Sue, maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Damien, and happy Friday. My experience has largely been in corporate for quite a number of years, and more recently now just joined a number of boards and doing some private consulting work. So I get to work with different leaders, different senior executives, and just different people every day. So no 2 days are the same for me, which is probably a great segue into what we're doing today, because I haven't met Ellen before, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the Ellen Jackson story.
Terrific. So, and Ellen, thank you very much for joining us on our respective couches, or the metaphor of our respective couches. So, Ellen, I'll get you to talk more about yourself in a minute, but a workplace psychologist, internationally published writer, speaker, podcaster, 147 podcasts and counting, which is awesome. So, your current roles, and this probably doesn't do them justice, but owner of a Potential Psychology and a podcaster, leadership programs lead at the Committee for Ballarat, and also a sessional lecturer in leadership at the MBA program for the Federation University. So just a small number of things that you've got on your plate at this point in time. Master of Applied Science in Psychology of Coaching, grad dip in Psychology, and a Bachelor of Commerce with majors in Psychology and Marketing, which is very, very impressive. And your podcast, Potential Psychology. And in 2019, I didn't realize this, but 2019 was a finalist in the Australian Podcast Awards. So well done. Congratulations. And Sue and I have done, I think this is number 5 or number 6 on My Couch. So we're starting behind, but we'll try and catch you. But maybe sort of, what I'm interested in is Ellen, maybe introduce yourself and maybe your why. And I know you've got a great phrase in terms of your 6-word purpose. So I'd love to hear you talk about that as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Damien. Hi, Sue. Hi to everybody who's watching. That little bio, Friday morning, and I'm feeling a little weary. And when you list it all out like that, I'm starting to see why. You don't necessarily think when you're working on any individual project, the accumulation of all of those things going on in the background. But so I don't do them all literally at once, but there can be any number of those projects on the go on any given day, certainly any given week. So I am a workplace psychologist by training. I've done that for the last 20 years. I am a podcaster. The podcast's been on the air now. It will be 5 years next month, which is exciting, because if you look at the stats on podcasts, not many of them last more than 12 months. So I feel like we're still a little indie show, but we have tenure now of some description. So that's exciting. And I guess it's interesting that you asked that question, Damien, because I actually recorded a podcast episode that'll go live in a few weeks with a woman called Bea Boccolandro, who is an expert in purpose, and particularly what she calls job purposing, which is a little like what we call job crafting in psychology, but it's really about understanding how you can better align your work day to day, and then more strategically in terms of career, with what you feel is your purpose. And as we got talking over the course of this conversation, I was talking about, and I don't think I'd really conceptualized it for myself in this way until that point, that my purpose is around people being the best versions of themselves in workplaces. So it's really about how do we get to be the best humans in a workplace. And that's been an interesting evolution over the 20 years or so that I've done that, because when I did my graduate studies, but also my Bachelor of Commerce many, many years ago, organizations, workplaces, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about people. Mm-hmm. We might have been resources or capital, but we didn't talk much about the human experience of work and workplaces. It was very much a focus on systems and models and procedures, and the people part didn't really play a big part. And there's been a considerable evolution, and the pandemic has probably just amplified that when we've started to realize that people are people, they have homes, they have families, they have, we got to see all of that on video. They have struggles, we need to be resilient, and that's probably enhanced the trajectory of some of those conversations. But it's really exciting for me as somebody who's purpose, and I do have a little 6-word purpose statement, which is a cool exercise that people can do. Oh, excuse my lights going on and off. Which is help others live, learn, and flourish. Mm-hmm. So I do that I like to think, every context. So whether it's the coaching client, whether it's through education via the podcast, whether it's through the teaching work that you and I have done together, whether it's through my workplace committee for Ballarat, we run leadership programs, it factors in there too. So it's kind of a consistent theme about helping others to live, to learn, and to flourish. That was a very long answer to your question.
No, great answer. Thank you.
So just you mentioned the pandemic and obviously thinking about putting the people into the human resources equation, or a human capital, I think, we were called at some point in time. Mm. So sort of how, into using the word thrive then, what does that concept really mean to you, and how would you define it, and why is it important in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, so a big part of what I talk about in all contexts, and have for a while, did pre-pandemic as well, but again, it's just kind of escalated the conversation, I think, is around how we help ourselves and others to thrive. So when it comes to a leadership conversation, it's how do you help your team, your organisation, the individuals in that to thrive. A lot of the work I do is still with individuals as well. So that's about how do we help ourselves to thrive. And it's interesting because from an academic perspective, there's no firmly agreed upon definition of thriving at this point. Like lots of things, this field of work is evolving. It's relatively new. When I say that, it's kind of 20 years old, but that's still relatively new. And so we haven't really, and there's a lot of different people of different academic persuasions, I suppose, getting involved in this conversation. So whether it's about workplaces and leadership, whether it's from a psychological perspective. So there's no firmly agreed upon definition. In the field of positive psychology, which is kind of my background and more commonly known as wellbeing science now, we talk about, see if I can say it now, flourishing. Thriving and flourishing is hard when it's in your head together. So flourishing, which is feeling good and functioning well. Mm-hmm. So again, that's, how am I feeling? How am I functioning? And that's a determinant of thriving, or less a determinant, but perhaps a descriptor. And then thriving in a workplace concept, again, lots of different literature, lots of different definitions. The one that I really like looks at it in terms of, am I feeling a sense of vitality, so a sense of energy, and do I feel like I'm learning and growing? So that sense of mastery, that sense of competence. So do I feel, energized, and do I feel like I'm growing and learning and developing my skills and perhaps progressing in meaningful ways for me? So that, I think, is probably, certainly talking in a workplace context, the most meaningful definition. In a post-COVID world, and I'm not entirely sure we are post-COVID yet, but we're in some other phase of this pandemic, certainly officially. What's been great is it's just opened up a conversation about some of these concepts. And a lot of that has come from resilience. It's come from the need for adapting to change. It's come from the need to be able to deal with stress. So in a way, it's been preempted by what we might like to call a kind of a deficit mindset. How do we fix what's broken or not feeling so flash at the moment? But it's on this spectrum at which you've got those sorts of challenges at one end, and then really this feeling good, functioning well, feeling vital sits at the other end of the spectrum. So we've got an opportunity, and I think it's increasingly, when we talk about resilience, for example, to talk about, well, what we know in terms of what is academia, what does the science regarding wellbeing tell us about what it is to thrive? How do we get more people there? Because we know that once we can start moving more people in that direction, it helps to buffer, build our resilience and our capability to deal with change, to deal with challenge. And, we've seen that on a scale we've never seen before, really.
So from a corporate point of view, how do you know whether you've been successful in describing everything that you've done? And obviously everyone's always looking for an ROI, or what's the KPI on that. So if you bring it back to a business sense, how do you know you've been successful, and what is a measure of success?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And again, because it's an evolving field, and depending on, which persuasion you might come at it from, a definition of success is going to vary. But certainly what we know is that if we can get people flourishing in the workplace, we can get them feeling good, functioning well, and having that sense of vitality, that sense of learning and growing, there's clear evidence now that links that to a whole raft of outcome measures. So customer service, for example, better customer service outcome, customer satisfaction, productivity, certainly engagement, reduced conflict in the workplace. There's a whole raft of kind of traditional organizational metrics we might use that has been linked to getting more people into this space. Now, how you do that is going to vary markedly, and it is all kind of mixed up a little in the leadership culture conversation as well. I'd love to be able to say there's a kind of a 6-step process that you put people through where they come in not thriving and they come out thriving. But of course, human beings aren't straightforward like that. And we're situated within a context. So you could have somebody who might be at a very personal level feeling like they're thriving. They join a new job, they join a new organization, they're on that learning curve, they're excited to be there. But if the culture of the team, the culture of the organization sitting around them doesn't facilitate continued thriving or allow them to thrive, if it's toxic, if it's, doesn't allow that learning opportunity, that growth opportunity, or if there's just fundamentally not a good match between that person. Excuse my lights going off again. This is going to be a problem. We're sitting in the dark. I'll just stand up for a moment. You might have to edit this bit out. Right. They're on that time, apparently. So yeah, if it's situated in that context and that doesn't allow those people to thrive, then, that's a problem in itself. So it's not a kind of a singular unit thing. It's context, it's systemic.
If I go back to the start of the question, in terms of the piece about the pandemic, obviously that's where we got to see people's whole selves, as you identified, lots of Zoom calls. So you got to see inside their house or their bedroom or what have you. So if thinking about that a little bit more, you've got a perfect work environment. How much influence, or how do you control the uncontrollable factors that something's happened in someone's home or in their personal life, and they then come to work and the environment is fantastic. Your engagement scores are out of the highest that they can be. Your staff turnover is probably minuscule, so you'd be ticking all the boxes, but then you have this other factor that you can't control. So how do you deal with when people bring their whole selves to work and there's situations that they may not want to share, or they have a big influence on their working success?
Which is a great question. And I think fundamentally we can't control it. We can't do anything about it. So probably accepting that as a starting point, it is part of life, and it is part of being really conscious that, and I think that's far better ultimately. It might feel uncomfortable, it might feel difficult, it might pose a whole lot of challenges to leaders that they haven't previously had to face, where people just kept home at home and didn't talk about it. But as a human being, it's impossible to really be your best at work if you've got something troublesome occurring in the work. We can only kind of shut those things off to some extent and for so long before it starts to have an impact. So having done a lot of work with how we have what we call mental health conversations in the workplace, it's very much around having that psychologically safe environment, having that connection with a leader. So one of the things that we know from the research is that leaders who take what we call a supportive approach, so that doesn't mean that they bend over backwards, it doesn't mean they don't have boundaries, it doesn't mean that they're there, holding somebody's hand, taking them to counselling. And it certainly doesn't mean that they have to help solve these problems that are unrelated to work themselves. But if they are open and encouraging and they know their people as individuals and they have a good relationship with them, and therefore those individuals feel comfortable saying, you know what, there's just some stuff going down at home that I don't want to go into right now, but I just really need to make you aware. And if it means that I'm not always my best self, you know, every day, or I need to leave early, or I need to, you know, take a day, I just need you to know that. And for the leader then to say, understand, let's nut it out together. What have you got on your plate? You know, what do you think you can do? What can't you do? Come to me at any point where you think you need more support. Is there stuff you want to outsource? If you've got that kind of relationship where those conversations can happen, everything just runs smoother. You know, it just means that people feel comfortable being able to manage, and therefore they'll be able to manage it proactively, confidently. You know, they'll feel like they can go and get the additional support or whatever it is, or take the time that they need to address these things, perhaps during work hours, because they know they've got the support of their manager, and the manager then is going to get the best person. It's when you can't have those conversations and it becomes this, oh, this person's, and then, you know, suddenly they're not performing. Now it's a performance management issue, and it probably isn't, you know. But if we have that kind of environment where people don't feel that they can have those conversations, where they don't feel that they can go and be open to their manager about what's going on without having to cross boundaries, without having to divulge everything, you know, there's respect there, then, you know, it might feel easier in the short term, but you've got bigger problems down the track.
It's interesting. So it reminds me, you know, one of our, you know, previous guests on our couch, you know, Alison, when she was talking about the, you know, what's the focus for 2023, and actually was a lot of what Ellen's talking about. So Alison's a very experienced, you know, senior executive, and we sort of said, what's the aspect of leadership that you're focusing on in 2023? And it was part of what you're talking about, actually trying to listen more, to be, you know, and to be present more, and to be less judgmental. So for exactly a lot of the stuff that you've talked about there. So, yeah. but it's hard though, isn't it? It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely, because we are creatures of our context and our environment. And, you know, one of, I think, my goals and the goals of many of my colleagues who work in this area is to be able to just share more information, you know, have these conversations, talk about what mental health really is. There is still, whilst it's changed and changing quite rapidly, there's still some stigma attached to it. People don't feel comfortable saying that they're not coping. And so trying to normalize some of that has been in some ways a positive of the pandemic. But it's still early days, and there's an awful lot of people in workplaces who don't feel comfortable having those conversations. And there's another contextual challenge around that, because there's a lot of organizations and cultures and systems that see that as quite threatening in a way, you know, or you can't have that conversation with that person. What if it's, you know, what if it goes wrong? What if you say the wrong thing? There's still a strong sense, and I get that from a lot of people. I'm really worried I'm going to say the wrong thing, which I always point out is as my teenagers like to tell me, that's a you problem. You know, that's not a staff member problem. That's a you problem. You know, you need to take your ego out of this and not worry so much about what you say. But, you know, if they then get concerned that, you know, somebody further down or the HR department's going to pull them up and say, oh, you had an inappropriate conversation, you know, there's a lot of fear that sits around some of this stuff. So trying to give people the tools, trying to give people the education, trying to give people the confidence to say you can have a conversation, get to know someone, without you having to solve their problems, without you having to be the counsellor, without you having to fear that you're going to say the wrong thing. So it's moving. And I started doing that work with colleagues, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago. And we saw just, you know, that was the first time that having a conversation about mental health at work was really sort of happening, you know, and so it was there pre-pandemic, and, you know, it'll continue on, but it's going to take a little while.
Okay, cool. So should we move on and talk about the future of work? Because it seems to be a nice segue. What do you think?
Absolutely. And probably interestingly, I think when you were talking about the situation, everyone just wants to go back to the way things were. That's probably, and not that probably it certainly wasn't perfect, but there's this sense of, oh, we need to go back to the way it was. So in terms of the future of work, how do you push through that and get to where we need to be now?
Yeah, there's no going back. We can't undo what we've experienced. And neither should we want to, I don't think. I think if we take this, if part of being a thriving individual, part of being a thriving team or thriving workplace is this sense of learning and mastery, then it's really, let's celebrate what we've learned. Let's celebrate what we've survived. Let's celebrate what we've been through, and come out the other end of. So, whilst there's no literal going back, I think in another sense, we shouldn't want to do that. When it comes to the future of work, and I'm not an expert, but what I have done recently is interview a really smart man by the name of Dr. Joe Sweeney, who's an academic researcher, policy analyst, education specialist, got many hats, in Sydney. And we had a series of conversations on my podcast about the future of work and some research that he'd done. And it was really interesting because I think for many of us, and certainly at the moment, it seems to be really pertinent, this conversation about artificial intelligence and, things like ChatGPT and all of these kind of new things that are coming out that are very clever and that are going to save us time and going to save us work. But of course, we need to learn how to use them. We need to learn how to manage them. We need to learn what the implications of those things are. And so I hear a lot of conversation about, when we think about particularly kids coming, what skills are they going to need? And it's interesting because I'm posing those to Joe and say, will we all be replaced by robots? Is AI going to take over the world, et cetera, et cetera? And whilst there is an element of truth, not so much to being replaced by robots, but robots playing a part and have been for a long time already, certainly in manufacturing, there's no real need for concern in regard to those things. But what's been interesting has been, what are the skills that we're going to need? Because I think from an educational perspective, my understanding is a lot of conversation about, we're going to need to know, have all these digital skills, have, all of this, IT skills and be able to know how to, and he said, the AI is going to do all of that. The software is going to do all of that. We don't need that. He said, really what human beings will need, and I would argue as a psychologist, we've always needed, but perhaps increasingly so, are stress management skills, adaptability to change, critical thinking skills, really good relationship management skills. Because if the technology is going to take over a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff that we've done, the bit that it can't take over is the human being element. And so, and I think that's been another, in some ways, positive of the pandemic, is that there's been this considerable change. So understanding how humans adapt to change, how do we stay resilient in the face of change? What's going on for us cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, when we're faced with rapid change and change that's very much out of our control. So being able to have a really good, and there's, there's skill development stuff we can do there. It starts with what we call psychoeducation, just learning what that means. How does that work? How do human beings respond to change? How do we adapt well? So a raft of really human skills were the things that seem to be kind of key to the future and the future of work, which again, I'm entirely biased, but makes perfect sense to me.
So you used a phrase there, sort of psychoeducation. Can you just help me understand that a little bit more? What
I know it sounds weird, doesn't it? So how to be a psycho? No. It's basically psychology. So there's another way of phrasing it's called psychological literacy.
Okay.
So it's essentially having an understanding. So I suppose if you're delivering it, it's psychoeducation. It's education about human beings. And that is not just psychological, it can be neuroscience as well, how the brain works, how the body works, how the systems work, how we function in groups, a lot of, what a lot of workplace sites have been doing for a long time. And then on the receiving end, I suppose, or the goal is to improve psychological literacy for people so that we have a better understanding of how we function as human beings, how our brains work, how our thoughts work, how our feelings work. And once we've got that better understanding, we've then able to start building our toolkit to manage and do what we call, self-regulation for those spheres.
So, and then just expanding on that a little bit then, so, what does this mean? So one of the themes that runs through the discussions that Sue and I have, from a number of different perspectives is around leadership. So what does this mean for leaders and for leadership then, if you think about some of the things that we've been talking about around thriving and also future of work?
Look, and again, I mean, it's very hard for me to kind of deliver a thought on this without it being entirely biased. But in all of that context,
didn't you say before though you had a 6-step process that we just need to follow the 6 steps? I thought I heard you say that. Just I'm waiting for the 6 steps.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and check. It is really it's understanding human beings, understanding how they work, understanding and it's one of those things that I've found a little frustrating over my career, because psychologists have known this stuff for a long time, and yes, we're all still learning and the science is still evolving, because that's the nature of science. But, some really fundamental things that psychologists have known about the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior, this triangle that we have, that, when we have a thought, it has an impact on our behavior, it has an impact on our feelings, and those three things. There's some really fundamental stuff that psychologists have been teaching their therapy clients for years and years and years, but we've only really done it in that context, wait until somebody ends up in some form of therapeutic relationship, and then we teach them, we kind of build them back up again. So there's all of that information that's available to every leader that helps them to better understand themselves, and therefore helps them to better understand that they're people they're dealing with. So when they see a behavioral response and they go, far out, where's that coming from? They've actually got some of the tools and knowledge to unpack that a little bit and go, okay, well, maybe they're behaving that way because they're thinking these thoughts because they feel they're under threat, because something's changing in their workplace, and they can sort of start to see how all of that fits together. So that understanding of the human experience, the human condition, is helpful for us all as individuals. It's helpful for leaders as individuals, and then it helps them to understand the behavior that they see in others and therefore act accordingly.
Okay, so I think Sue's going to ask a couple of questions about leadership in a minute, but before we go there, just if you think about the what you've talked about in terms of thriving and the future of work. So we've talked about a lot about the sort of the challenges, but where are the opportunities? Do you think what should we get excited about in terms of the future of work?
Well, again, so many opportunities. I mean, so many things to be excited about. Yep. We are discovering a lot more. One of the, again, this conversation I had for my podcast yesterday with Bea Boccalandro was about purpose, and some of the really fascinating research that's coming out around what it means for people to understand what their purpose is. And purpose isn't this huge, big kind of complex, I have to go out and find my purpose. This is a sense of feeling like you're doing something meaningful with your day-to-day, for example. And that's going to come in lots of different forms. It's going to come in big and small. It's going to come in things that are very work-related or not very work-related. And the increasing amount of research and understanding, and we were talking about the fact that at a personal, individual level can be meaningful and useful. How do I find a bit more meaning in what I do each day? How do I perhaps reframe my role as an administrative assistant to how, who I'm helping day to day, and whether or not I can use my strength of kindness, or, so that then it becomes a far more meaningful exercise than just ticking off a to-do list. At a collective level, at an organizational level, that's when we're starting to talk about things like corporate purpose, when we're starting to talk about corporate social responsibility and some of these sorts of concepts. And this is all, really emerging recently, and will continue to do so. And we're now having, we've got enough data to be able to say that this has an impact on all of those metrics we talked about before, engagement and productivity and customer service and, turnover and every metric you might want to measure. We're starting to see the research come through to link those two things, but it also has a physiological benefit for human beings. It contributes to thriving, it contributes to mental health. So, I think that's going to be one of the really cool spheres in which we see more and more conversation that can only benefit ultimately, workplaces, the individuals in those workplaces, but also the planet. We're linking these concepts to the sustainability and development goals. If we're cleaning up oceans and we're, removing carbon from the atmosphere and helping develop, underdeveloped nations, then, it's just multi-system benefit, which is cool. It's cool. It's exciting.
Great.
So I was just thinking when you were talking there, one of the organisations that I do some work with is Life Education Australia. And we've just developed this new resource called Guide to Thrive. And actually it's for students that are going from year 6 to year 7 or primary school to high school, because that's a big change, big change in people's lives. And it's a resource that's for the student, for teachers, and also for parents, so that they can address it. It's just interesting that this word thriving, and it seems like it's really key now, and it's ageless in terms of where do you start to learn to thrive, and these sort of leadership skills. So do you think there's an opportunity in schools and education, or do you have to wait till you join the corporate world and actually get a job and you start talking about these concepts? Where should you, when should this discussion be happening about thriving?
Yeah, look, it's a lifelong thing as far as I'm concerned, because it's not something that ever stops, and there's always something else to learn. But yeah, look, I mean, the earlier we can talk to kids about, and I think there's a broader conversation here around mental health, so much, and anybody who knows me knows how much I bang my head against the wall when I hear people talking about mental health, when in fact they're talking about mental ill health. They talk about the mental health problem or people's mental health struggles. And yes, that's true, but mental health is a spectrum. And so whilst we might have 25% of our population, which is still too many, dealing with the struggle end at any point in time, and that includes people in our workplaces, there's 75% of us who are not dealing with that. And what do we know about what builds our mental health? What do we know about helps us to stay at that end, or indeed get to the thriving end? So thriving really sits at one end of the mental health spectrum. And that's a conversation, that's a lifelong education piece. So, and it is happening in schools. It's really exciting. Victoria actually leads the way in the field of positive education. So that's understanding how this stuff works within the education setting. And I think even, the fact that they now help kids, they discuss mindfulness, for example, with little kids. I remember when my younger son was in kindergarten, they do mindfulness, which I suspect was just the teachers trying to, the educators taking it. We're just going to be sitting and be mindful. So i.e. you all just sit and be quiet for a few minutes. But, even the language makes a difference. You can start to talk. And again, psychologists have known for a very long time the importance of helping kids to understand how they operate, so that they've got those tools at their disposal all the way through life, so that when they do get to those important junctures, they've got the skills to regulate, to manage their stress, to understand what's going on, to understand the behaviour of others. So again, it's a really exciting field. There's lots of opportunity there, and it is a lifelong thing. And to some extent, it's possibly leaving it a little late for those of us who are doing it in our, the later years of our careers, but, we can all still learn.
Correct. Damien.
Yeah, cool. So, and it's actually, you've led me to the area I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit more, was around, learning from experience. So, if you think about, you're clearly very experienced, you've successful career across a whole range of areas, and one of the benefits of experience is you get the opportunity to reflect and look back on what we've done. So maybe let's focus on you and your achievements. If we pushed you and said, okay, narrow it down, what are your top 3 achievements? What are you most proud of?
Oh, that is a really look, still doing interesting, engaging work, I think, is probably the thing that I'm, of all the things that I've done. And I have had the luxury of being able to work as a consultant for the better part of the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And, whilst, you would know yourself, some challenges come with that. It's, you're either got 1,000 things going on or nothing going on, but I've always really firmly believed in doing interesting work with good people. That's kind of been my philosophy, and it has allowed me to make my decisions about the work that I do accordingly. Is this an interesting job? Will I learn something? Are these good people that I want to work with? And so with that kind of framework, making decisions and choices. So being able to do that for a very long time has been enormously gratifying. Today, I actually spend more time working with the Committee for Ballarat doing community leadership work, which is around community development and helping to enhance the capability and the capacity of our leaders in our community for the betterment of our city and our region, which I also find incredibly meaningful work. We've got a fantastic team here. So it kind of, still, despite the fact that I'm actually an employed person for the first time in 20 something years, it's doing great work with good people. So that probably is the thing that I'm most proud of, that I have continued to shape my career so that I've been able to do that. Because sometimes that does require hard decisions. Sometimes that requires taking risks.
Yep.
My podcast, I'm very proud of it. It makes me no money. It's very time consuming. I actually spend money on it because I pay other people to help me with it. But both the conversations I get to have are just amazing. I've spoken to so many people, from documentary makers to academics to practitioners in a whole raft of different fields. And it's for somebody for whom love of learning is one of my top strengths.
Yeah. It
fuels that curiosity and love of learning. So to be able to sit there and ask questions of somebody, and then to be able to put that out and share it with other people in the world. And I have these surreal experiences. I was in a shop recently, just before Christmas, was Christmas Eve, and I had reason to give the person standing on the other side of the counter my name, and she kind of looked at me and she said, "I thought your voice was familiar." She said, "I listened to your podcast." Because you forget when you're doing it that there's actually people listening to it on the other end. So, that's really nice. That's something that I really enjoy doing, that is meaningful to me, is making a difference, and people are enjoying as well. So that's probably number 2. I'm not even sure what the third one's going to be.
Work in progress.
There's a lot in there already.
But you'd have a husband and 2 children. I
do have a husband and 2 children, and of course I am incredibly proud of it. I was situating it in a career context, but and look, that juggle, I think that so many people can relate to, of trying to be the best version of yourself for your career, but also trying to be the best version of yourself for the important people in your life. That's an ongoing thing, and it's not always easy, and I hope I'm getting it right, but I don't really know, and maybe we never know. So, but we're all still an intact family unit, and kids seem to be doing okay. So, dog's happy. I'll take that as a win.
Good. Hey, Ellen, thank you so much. I mean, we could keep talking for hours. So I've really enjoyed this discussion. I was really, we had the benefit of the great privilege of working with you at FedUni. So I was really keen to actually have this conversation with you and learn more about, thriving, and also the future of work, and just have a really good conversation, about leadership. So certainly got me thinking about a few things, as always happens when I'm working with you. So thank you for that. I mean, Sue, any thoughts, any takeaways from you? What did Ellen get you thinking about?
I really appreciated the discussion around the future of work, and the fact that everyone seems to think it's going to be AI, and yes, there's going to be a lot of that in the role, but it made me think of that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And leadership and being the best person that you can possibly be is infinitely important today, in the future, as it was in the past. And so for me, that was the takeaways, that those skills and those people skills are just as significant and important, and we need to continue to work to be the best versions of ourselves that we possibly can be.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, good. And Ellen, I mean, this is your time. If you want, potential psychology. What are we up to? 146, 147?
I've lost count. But it's something in that order. We certainly hit. We passed the 100 mark last year. Yeah. And there were a couple of years there during the pandemic when I was remote schooling children and trying to work and trying to do a podcast all at the same time, where the output slowed significantly, but we are back on track now. So so the show is called Potential Psychology. I interview, as I said earlier, a raft of experts across psychology, neuroscience, but also to some extent the arts, leadership, really anything kind of that piques my interest. It's one of the benefits of having an independent show, is that I can just decide who I want to talk to. But it's always with the theme of, how do we fulfill our potential? That's I guess hold on. We're doing really well there.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's always with the theme of how do we fulfill our potential? So the very many ways we can come at that. It is available on all of your podcast platforms. So if you search Potential Psychology, whether that's Spotify or Apple or where you like to consume your podcasts, we are back on the air for 2023 this month. And very excited about that. And we will be consistently delivering the show, she says confidently, throughout the year. So yeah, that's, and my website's potential.com.au. So all of the information about the podcast is there as well.
Cool. Terrific. Ellen, thank you once again. Really nice to see you and really enjoyed our conversation. Sue, thank you for joining me on our respective couches. And look forward to our next On My Couch session from an OMC group perspective. You know, if you're interested in the work that we do, have a look at omc-group.com.au. But Ellen, thank you very much once again, and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you both. It's been a lot of fun.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.